During the early hours of March 15, 1889, employees at Newport, Rhode Island's prestigious Belmont hotel made a discovery that would terrorize the city's upper class for generations. The suite numbered 237, permanently reserved for one of the nation's most renowned society figures, remained vacant with its silk drapes still closed, untouched champagne flutes from the prior evening's intimate gathering remaining on the marble surface, and an incomplete, unsigned letter left abandoned on the desk. Isabella Fairmont, a woman who had previously captivated presidents and royalty alike, had mysteriously disappeared into the March mist, leaving only the lingering fragrance of Parisian perfume and an enigma that law enforcement would attempt to unravel for the following 4 decades. Their investigation would uncover revelations so shocking that 3 influential families offered substantial bribes to have the police files permanently sealed. Before we delve deeper into Isabella Fairmont's tale and the web of deception that caused her vanishing, I need you to take action. Please subscribe and activate notifications because these buried stories are precisely what we expose here. Also, comment with your state because Isabella's narrative connects to sinister secrets that may have extended well beyond Rhode Island's opulent estates. To comprehend why Isabella Fairmont's vanishing created shockwaves throughout America's most influential circles, we must first travel back to its origins. In 1881, Newport's social scene centered around summer estates that required more funds to construct than complete municipalities. The Gilded Era had birthed a new nobility of railway tycoons, steel moguls, and maritime empire builders. Their wealth was nowhere more ostentatiously showcased than along Newport's Bellevue Avenue. Within these titans of commerce and their meticulously orchestrated social networks, Isabella Fairmont ruled absolutely. Originally named Isabella Catherine Aldridge in 1859, she possessed the exceptional blend of established Boston heritage and fresh wealth that made her irresistible to Newport's social apparatus. Her father, maritime tycoon Cornelius Aldridge, had constructed his empire transporting merchandise along the eastern coastline, while her mother traced her lineage to an original Massachusetts Bay Colony founding family. This ancestry, combined with Isabella's breathtaking beauty, jet black hair, penetrating azure eyes, and a physique that made French fashion designers weep with inspiration, had established her position as summer society's unofficial monarch. Her union with Theodore Fairmont in 1878 had been the century's wedding spectacle. Theodore, inheritor of a Pennsylvania steel fortune, possessed a serious, reliable character that balanced Isabella's spirited nature. Their Newport residence, Rosecliff Manor, featured 70 chambers, Italian marble imported at enormous expense, and landscaped grounds requiring 20 staff members to maintain. Isabella's summer gatherings became legendary elaborate events where politicians mingled with European aristocracy, where million-dollar business transactions were negotiated over champagne and caviar, and where a single invitation could guarantee lifelong social standing. Local publications couldn't satisfy their appetite for her activities. The Newport Daily News published a weekly feature simply called Mrs. Fairmont's Week, chronicling her charitable activities, fashion selections, and guest rosters. She supported the arts with genuine passion, financing Newport's first legitimate theater construction and personally choosing the European performers for her soirees. Her influence transcended mere social functions. Railway executives valued her business opinions, politicians pursued her support, and even President Chester Arthur had dined at her residence during summer 1883. However, beneath the sparkling facade of Isabella's carefully managed existence, sinister undercurrents were beginning to emerge. The identical social mechanism that had elevated her to such prominence operated through gossip, speculation, and the perpetual possibility of scandal. In Newport's sealed environment of inherited fortunes and artificial respectability, reputation meant everything, and reputations, as Isabella would discover, could be demolished with surgical accuracy. The initial rumors commenced during summer 1884, in what society writers would later term the Season of Shadows. It began harmlessly enough. Isabella had been observed dining privately with Jonathan Pembroke, an attractive young architect commissioned to design additions for several Newport estates. Pembroke, barely 30, and possessing the romantic intensity that made society matrons nervously flutter their fans, had arrived in Newport with flawless references and an enigmatic background that only enhanced his allure. Jonathan Pembroke's Newport arrival had been orchestrated with military campaign precision, His previous projects, a Gothic revival estate for a steel baron, and a colonial mansion restoration in Virginia, demonstrated both artistic vision and practical expertise, but his personal magnetism truly set tongues wagging. Tall and slender, with dark hair perpetually falling across his brow and intense emerald eyes that seemed to penetrate high society's elaborate facades, Pembroke possessed something Newport's typical selection of appropriate gentlemen lacked: danger. Isabella first encountered him during a Trinity Church Expansion Committee meeting. She was examining architectural blueprints when Pembroke entered the chamber, and witnesses later remembered the electric instant when their gazes met across the mahogany conference table. What started as professional consultation rapidly developed into something far more intimate and infinitely more dangerous. Their relationship evolved with the reckless passion that occurs only when two dominant personalities recognize kindred souls in one another. Pembroke would visit Rosecliff Manor under the guise of renovation consultations, but he and Isabella would vanish for hours, strolling through her perfectly maintained gardens or sequestered together in her private office. The estate staff, trained in discretion yet still human, began observing details: how Isabella's laughter sounded different when Pembroke was present, the frequency of his appearances, the correspondence arriving with his distinctive penmanship. Theodore Fairmont, preoccupied with his steel enterprises and trusting his wife's social expertise, remained unaware of the developing attachment. He endorsed Pembroke's architectural work and even complimented Isabella for her excellent contractor selection. This blindness would later haunt him. But during summer 1884, Theodore perceived only what he chose to see: his beautiful wife managing their social responsibilities with her characteristic grace and intelligence. However, Newport society functioned at a surveillance level that would have impressed European intelligence services. By August, whispers had become murmurs, and by September, murmurs had crystallized into certainty. Isabella Fairmont was conducting an affair. The evidence was circumstantial but devastating within high society's merciless moral calculations. She had been seen entering Pembroke's temporary Thames Street studio. They had been observed sharing intimate conversations at the casino, their heads inclined together, suggesting secrets. Most damaging, Mrs. Cornelius Vanderbilt's personal servant claimed witnessing a passionate embrace between them in a conservatory during a private dinner party. The social machinery that had elevated Isabella now turned against her with mechanical precision. Exclusive gathering invitations began arriving less regularly. Former friends adopted cooler conversational tones. Newport society's careful choreography, which had once revolved around Isabella's preferences and agenda, subtly reorganized itself to diminish her significance. Isabella, however, appeared almost oblivious to the shifting atmosphere. Friends later described her as existing in an intoxicated state, not from alcohol, but from the consuming passion that renders victims incapable of rational thinking. She continued meeting Pembroke with increasing audacity, as if challenging society to confront her directly. This defiance, potentially admirable under different circumstances, only accelerated her fall from favor. The scandal erupted publicly on October 12, 1884, in the most destructive manner possible through the New York Herald's morning edition. A society columnist identified only as observer published a detailed account of Isabella's affair under the headline "Newport's Fallen Angel." The article, crafted with a precise malice suggesting insider knowledge, laid out the evidence of Isabella's relationship with Pembroke in devastating detail. But the Herald article contained information that shocked even Newport's gossip-hardened elite. According to the columnist, Pembroke was not merely an architect seeking romantic adventure with a bored socialite. He was, the article alleged, a man with considerable gambling debts and a history of relationships with affluent women in other cities. The piece suggested Isabella had been providing him with money, substantial amounts, withdrawn from her personal accounts, and that several valuable items from the Fairmont art collection had been quietly sold to cover his debts. The revelation struck Theodore Fairmont like a physical assault. His wife had not merely been unfaithful, she had potentially been swindled by a professional fortune hunter. The humiliation was compounded by realizing that his business associates, social peers, and household staff had all been aware of the situation while he remained ignorant. The confrontation between Theodore and Isabella occurred on October 13th evening in Rosecliff Manor's library. According to Theodore's later testimony to private investigators, Isabella initially denied the affair but collapsed when presented with bank records showing the money transfers. She admitted to the relationship but insisted her feelings for Pembroke were genuine and that she had given him money from love. not manipulation. Theodore's response was swift and unforgiving. He demanded Isabella immediately cease all contact with Pembroke, return to Boston for the winter season, and submit to a period of social rehabilitation that would eventually allow them to restore their reputation. Isabella's refusal was equally immediate and absolute. She declared her love for Pembroke, that her marriage had been a mistake, and that she intended to seek divorce, a scandalous proposal that would have permanently ruined both their social positions. The household staff later reported hearing raised voices from the library until nearly midnight, followed by slamming doors and Isabella's footsteps on the marble staircase. When Theodore emerged the following morning, his face bore the hollow expression of someone who had aged a decade overnight. But Isabella's defiance came at a cost extending far beyond social embarrassment. Theodore's financial investigation revealed she had transferred nearly $50,000 to Pembroke over 4 months, some equivalent to over $1 million in today's currency. More disturbing were the discoveries made when Theodore's lawyers examined the artwork and jewelry sales that Isabella had claimed were routine collection updates. Several pieces, including a diamond necklace that had belonged to Theodore's mother, had been sold for significantly less than their appraised values, suggesting either poor judgment or deliberate deception. The final blow came when private investigators tracked down Pembroke's previous addresses in Pittsburgh. They discovered he had been involved with a prominent businessman's wife, receiving substantial money before disappearing suddenly when the relationship was discovered. In Richmond, a similar pattern had emerged with a tobacco fortune widow. The investigators' report painted a picture of a sophisticated confidence man who targeted lonely, wealthy women with surgical precision. When Theodore presented this evidence to Isabella, her reaction surprised even him. Rather than expressing shock or betrayal, she became defensive of Pembroke, insisting his previous relationships had been different and that their love was genuine. This response convinced Theodore that his wife had fallen victim to manipulation so complete that she could no longer distinguish between reality and the fantasy Pembroke had constructed for her. By November 1884, Isabella Fairmont's position in Newport society had become untenable. The Herald article had been reprinted in newspapers nationwide, transforming what might have been a local scandal into a national spectacle. The story contained everything readers craved: wealth, beauty, betrayal, and the downfall of someone they had been encouraged to both admire and resent. Theodore's ultimatum was simple and non-negotiable. Isabella must publicly renounce her relationship with Pembroke, submit to a year of virtual social exile, and accept severe restrictions on her personal finances and social activities. In exchange, he would not pursue divorce proceedings and would gradually work to rehabilitate their reputation. Through charitable work and careful social engineering, Isabella's response was to disappear for 3 days. She was discovered by her personal maid on November 15th, staying under an assumed name at a modest Providence boarding house. When confronted by Theodore and his lawyers, Isabella presented them with a proposal that was either desperate brilliance or complete madness. She would expose the entire network of social corruption that she claimed existed within Newport's elite circles. According to Isabella, her affair with Pembroke had provided her with access to information that could destroy several prominent families. She claimed that Pembroke, during their intimate conversations, had revealed details about his architectural commissions that included hidden rooms, secret passages, and concealed safes in several Newport mansions. More damaging still, she alleged that these modifications had been requested by clients who were using them to hide evidence of illegal business practices, tax evasion, and other criminal activities. Isabella's threat was specific and terrifying in its implications. She claimed to have documentation proving that Senator William Blackstone had hidden bribery evidence in a concealed compartment behind his library fireplace. She alleged that railroad magnate Charles Pemberton was storing forged documents related to land acquisition in a secret room beneath his wine cellar. Most explosively, she insisted that she possessed evidence linking 3 Newport families to a conspiracy to manipulate steel prices. During government contract negotiations, Theodore's lawyers were skeptical, but they were also terrified. In the highly interconnected world of Gilded Age business, accusations of this magnitude could trigger investigations that might expose legitimate business practices operating in legal gray areas. Even if Isabella's claims were false, the scandal of her making them publicly would be devastating to everyone involved. The meeting that took place on November 20, 1884, in the Belmont Hotel's private dining room included representatives from 5 of Newport's most powerful families, Isabella presented her demands with the cool precision of a seasoned negotiator: $100,000 in cash, Pembroke's debts to be quietly settled, and guaranteed safe passage for both of them to Europe, where they would remain permanently. In exchange, she would disappear from American society forever and take her allegations with her. The negotiation lasted 6 hours. By midnight, a deal had been struck, but with modifications Isabella had not anticipated. The families would provide the money and ensure Pembroke's debts were settled, but they insisted on additional conditions. Isabella and Pembroke would travel separately. They would not contact each other for at least 2 years, and they would both sign legally binding agreements never to return to the United States or communicate with any member of Newport society. Isabella agreed to the terms, but witnesses later reported that she seemed different during the final negotiations, distracted, almost dreamy, as if her thoughts were elsewhere. When asked if she understood the permanent nature of the exile she was accepting, she simply smiled and said that some sacrifices were worth making for love. The money was delivered to Isabella's hotel room on November 25, 1884. She was scheduled to depart for Europe on December 2, sailing from New York on the steamship Britannica. Pembroke had already left for England, departing 3 days earlier on a different vessel. Everything seemed arranged for what amounted to the most expensive love story in American social history. But Isabella Fairmont would never board the Britannica, and the mystery of what happened to her during those final 7 days would haunt Newport society for the rest of the century. Isabella's last week in America unfolded with the kind of meticulous planning that suggested either careful preparation or mounting desperation. She had checked out of her Providence boarding house and returned to Newport, taking a suite at the Belmont Hotel under her maiden name. The choice was symbolically appropriate. She was, in effect, reverting to her identity before marriage, before scandal, before the chain of events that had led to her exile. The hotel staff later reported that Mrs. Fairmont seemed remarkably calm. During her stay, she took her meals in her room, received no visitors, and spent most of her time writing letters. The hotel's desk clerk, a young man named William Chen who had immigrated from California's mining country, noted that she mailed at least a dozen letters during her stay, though he could not recall the addresses or recipients. On November 28, Isabella made an unusual request. She asked the hotel concierge to arrange for a photographer to take a formal portrait. The photographer, Marcus Steinberg, who had recently opened a studio specializing in society portraits, later described the session as one of the strangest of his career. Isabella posed for nearly 2 hours, insisting on multiple photographs in different poses and lighting conditions. She paid in cash and requested that the plates be developed immediately, waiting in his studio while the images were processed. Steinberg's description of Isabella during the session was haunting. She was still a beautiful woman, but there was something in her eyes, a kind of fierce determination mixed with profound sadness. She kept adjusting her jewelry, particularly a ruby brooch that she said had belonged to her grandmother. When I suggested she might want to schedule another session after returning from Europe, she just smiled and said that wouldn't be necessary. The photographs, which surfaced decades later during the probate of Steinberg's estate, showed Isabella in formal attire, her dark hair perfectly arranged, her expression serene but somehow final. In several of the images, she appeared to be looking past the camera, as if seeing something or someone that existed outside the photographer's studio. On December 1st, Isabella's behavior became even more unusual. She hired a carriage and spent the entire day visiting locations around Newport that had been significant in her social life. The casino where she had met so many important people, Trinity Church where she had been married, the Cliff Walk where she had strolled with visiting dignitaries. The carriage driver, Thomas McGillicuddy, later told police that Mrs. Fairmont seemed to be saying goodbye to each location, spending long minutes in silent contemplation at each stop. That evening, Isabella returned to the Belmont Hotel and requested that a late dinner be sent to her room. The hotel's night manager, Robert Sterling, personally delivered the meal and later reported that Isabella seemed agitated but determined. She had changed from her day dress into an elegant evening gown of deep blue silk, and her jewelry, including the ruby brooch from the photography session, caught the lamplight as she moved about the room. She thanked me for the service during her stay, Sterling recalled, and gave me a tip that was far too generous for the circumstances. When I protested, she said that generosity was one of the few privileges that money provided, and she wanted to exercise that privilege while she still could. The final confirmed sighting of Isabella Fairmont occurred at approximately 11:30 p.m. on December 1, 1889. hotel night clerk, William Chen, saw her descending the main staircase, dressed in a dark traveling coat and carrying a small leather valise. She moved with purpose, but without haste, nodding politely to Chen as she crossed the lobby. When he asked if she needed assistance with transportation, she declined, saying that her arrangements had already been made. Chen watched through the hotel's front windows as Isabella walked out into the December night. A thick fog had rolled in from the harbor, and within moments her figure was swallowed by the gray-white mist that frequently enveloped Newport during winter evenings. It was the last time anyone would see Isabella Fairmont alive. When she failed to appear for her scheduled departure on the Britannica the following morning, Theodore Fairmont contacted the police. The investigation that followed would uncover a web of secrets, lies, and unanswered questions that would perplex law enforcement for decades to come. The Newport Police Department had never handled a case quite like Isabella Fairmont's disappearance. Missing persons investigations in 1889 relied on witness testimony, physical evidence, and the kind of methodical detective work that was just beginning to emerge as a professional discipline. Chief Detective Samuel Harrison, a methodical man who had cut his teeth on waterfront crimes and domestic disputes, approached Isabella's case with the systematic thoroughness that would define police work for the next century. The first phase of the investigation focused on Isabella's movements during her final week in Newport. Harrison's team interviewed hotel staff, carriage drivers, shopkeepers, and anyone else who might have encountered her. What emerged was a picture of a woman who seemed to be methodically closing the chapters of her life, as if preparing for a journey from which she did not expect to return. The contents of Isabella's hotel room provided the first major clues. Her clothing and personal effects were neatly arranged, suggesting either hasty departure or careful preparation. More intriguing was what was missing. Several pieces of valuable jewelry, including a diamond bracelet that hotel staff had seen her wearing earlier in the week, were nowhere to be found. Her personal papers included drafts of letters that appeared to be final messages to family members, though the completed versions were never located. Most puzzling was a partially burned document found in the room's fireplace. The fragments that survived the flames contained what appeared to be financial calculations and several names, including J.P., presumably Jonathan Pembroke, and W.B. The latter initially mystified investigators until they realized it likely referred to William Blackstone, the senator whom Isabella had allegedly threatened to expose. Detective Harrison's investigation took a dramatic turn when he attempted to contact Jonathan Pembroke in London. The address that Isabella's lawyers had been given proved to be a mail forwarding service, and Pembroke himself seemed to have vanished as completely as Isabella. British authorities, responding to Harrison's inquiry, reported that no one matching Pembroke's description had registered at any of London's major hotels or boarding houses. This discovery led Harrison to a disturbing conclusion. Either Pembroke had been using a false identity, or he had never actually left for Europe at all. The steamship records confirmed that someone named Jonathan Pembroke had booked passage to London, but the shipping line's manifest showed that the passenger had never boarded the vessel. As Harrison dug deeper into Pembroke's background, a more sinister picture began to emerge. The architect's credentials, while impressive, were difficult to verify completely. His previous work in Pittsburgh and Richmond was real, but investigators discovered that he had left both cities under questionable circumstances, abandoning projects and leaving unpaid debts. More disturbing was the pattern of relationships with wealthy women that had marked his career in each location. But the most shocking discovery came when Harrison's team examined the architectural modifications that Pembroke had made to several Newport mansions. Working with local building inspectors, they confirmed that at least 3 houses contained the kind of hidden compartments and secret passages that Isabella had described. However, these modifications had been completed months before Isabella's affair with Pembroke became public knowledge, suggesting that his relationship with her might have been planned from the beginning. The investigation's focus shifted when Harrison received an unexpected visitor, Mrs. Margaret Winthrop, an elderly woman who had worked as a seamstress for several Newport families. Mrs. Winthrop claimed to have information about Isabella's disappearance, but she insisted on speaking privately and demanded assurance that her identity would be protected. Mrs. Winthrop's story was both fascinating and terrifying. According to her account, she had been working late in the sewing room at the Pemberton mansion on the night of December 1st, when she heard voices from the main house. Curious about who might be visiting at such a late hour, she had positioned herself near a window that overlooked the mansion's rear courtyard. What she witnessed, she claimed, was a clandestine meeting between Isabella Fairmont and two men she did not recognize. The conversation appeared to be heated, with Isabella gesturing emphatically while the men remained still and watchful. After approximately 20 minutes, one of the men handed Isabella what appeared to be a package or envelope, and she departed, with them in a closed carriage. Mrs. Winthrop's account was both compelling and problematic. She could not provide detailed descriptions of the two men, claiming that the lighting had been poor and her vantage point limited. Moreover, her reputation in Newport was somewhat questionable. She had been dismissed from previous positions for gossiping about her employer's private affairs. Harrison was inclined to dismiss her testimony until she provided a detail that only someone who had actually been present could have known. Isabella had been wearing the ruby brooch that the hotel staff had noticed, and it had caught the moonlight in a distinctive way. Just when we thought we'd seen it all, the horror in Newport intensifies. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what happens next. In Isabella's final moments, the breakthrough in Detective Harrison's investigation came from an unexpected source: the financial records of the 5 Newport families who had negotiated Isabella's exile agreement. Working with a federal investigator who specialized in financial crimes, Harrison discovered a series of money transfers that painted a disturbing picture of the events leading up to Isabella's disappearance. The $100,000 that was supposed to fund Isabella's European exile had been transferred to a New York bank account opened under the name by C. Aldridge, Isabella's maiden name and initials. However, the account had never been accessed. The money remained untouched, suggesting that Isabella had never had the opportunity to claim it. More significantly, the account had been opened by someone using forged documents, and the handwriting on the banking papers did not match Isabella's distinctive script. This discovery led Harrison to a chilling conclusion: someone had been impersonating Isabella during the final negotiations, or the entire exile agreement had been an elaborate deception designed to provide cover for more sinister plans. The investigation took on new urgency when Harrison discovered that Jonathan Pembroke had not disappeared. He had been found dead in a Boston boarding house on November 30th, the day before Isabella's disappearance. The cause of death was officially listed as heart failure, but the boarding house keeper reported that Pembroke had been visited by 2 well-dressed gentlemen on the day he died. The men had claimed to be business associates and had spent several hours with Pembroke in his room before departing quietly. Pembroke's death had been reported in Boston newspapers, but the story had not reached Newport until several days later. This timing suggested that Isabella might not have known about Pembroke's death when she made her final arrangements on December 1st. If she had been planning to meet him or join him in exile, she would have been walking into a trap. Harrison's investigation now focused on identifying the 2 men who had visited Pembroke in Boston and who Mrs. Winthrop claimed to have seen with Isabella on the night she disappeared. The breakthrough came when he discovered that several of the Newport families had employed the same private security firm, Pinkerton Detective Agency, to handle sensitive matters related to the Isabella scandal. The Pinkerton files, obtained through legal pressure applied by federal investigators, revealed the existence of what amounted to a conspiracy to permanently silence Isabella Fairmont. The records showed that agents had been tracking both Isabella and Pembroke for weeks, documenting their movements and monitoring their communications. Most damning were the strategic recommendations contained in the agency's reports, which suggested that the scandal posed such a significant threat to their clients' interests that permanent resolution might be necessary. The euphemistic language of the Pinkerton reports was chilling in its implications. References to neutralizing the threat and ensuring permanent discretion suggested that the detective agency had moved beyond surveillance into more sinister territory. One report, dated November 28, recommended immediate action to prevent exposure of client interests, and noted that the target's emotional instability provides optimal cover for various outcomes. But the most shocking discovery came when Harrison examined the original architectural plans for the hidden compartments that Pembroke had built in the Newport mansions. The plans included detailed specifications for a sophisticated hiding place beneath the wine cellar of the Pemberton mansion, a space large enough to conceal far more than documents or valuables. Working with federal investigators and local building inspectors, Harrison obtained a warrant to examine the Pemberton mansion's basement. What they discovered on February 14, 1890, would haunt everyone involved in the investigation for the rest of their lives. The search of the Pemberton mansion began at dawn on Valentine's Day, 1890. Detective Harrison had assembled a team that included federal investigators, local police officers, and a building inspector who specialized in structural modifications. The mansion's current resident, Charles Pemberton, had departed for his New York residence immediately after the warrant was issued, leaving behind a house that seemed frozen in time, its elegant rooms bearing witness to the kind of wealth and privilege that had defined Gilded Age Newport. The wine cellar, located beneath the mansion's main floor, appeared normal at first examination. Racks of imported wines lined the walls, and the stone floor showed no obvious signs of disturbance. But the building inspector's measurements revealed a discrepancy. The cellar's dimensions did not match. The architectural plans on file with the city there was approximately 8 feet of unaccounted space behind the north wall. Working carefully with picks and crowbars, the investigation team broke through what appeared to be a false wall constructed of the same stone as the cellar's original construction. Behind it lay a hidden chamber approximately 10 feet square and 8 feet high, with walls that had been lined with lead sheeting, a modification that would have prevented any sounds from escaping to the rooms above. The chamber was not empty. Isabella Fairmont's remains were discovered in the far corner of the hidden room, her body wrapped in what had once been an expensive silk evening cloak. The ruby brooch the hotel staff and the photographer Marcus Steinberg had noticed was still pinned to the fabric, though the silk itself had deteriorated significantly during the 2 months she had been missing. The coroner's examination revealed that Isabella had died from chloral hydrate poisoning, method that had become increasingly popular among professional killers. Because it was difficult to detect and could be administered without the victim's knowledge, the poison had been mixed with champagne, traces of which were found in a crystal glass discovered near her body. But perhaps most chilling was the evidence that Isabella had not died immediately. Scratch marks on the lead-lined walls suggested that she had been conscious when placed in the chamber and had attempted to escape before the poison took full effect. A partially written note found clutched in her hand contained what appeared to be accusations against her killers. Though the deteriorated paper made the text largely illegible, the discovery of Isabella's body transformed the investigation from a missing persons case into a murder inquiry of unprecedented complexity. The evidence suggested a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of Newport society, involving families whose names were synonymous with American industrial power. Detective Harrison's reconstruction of events painted a horrifying picture of premeditated murder disguised as scandal management. The exile agreement had been a ruse designed to provide cover for Isabella's disappearance. The 2 men who had met with her on the night of December 1st had been Pinkerton, agents acting on behalf of the Newport families who feared exposure of their business crimes. Isabella had been lured to the Pemberton mansion with the promise of final arrangements for her departure to Europe. Instead, she had been drugged, imprisoned in the hidden chamber, and left to die. The lead lining that had been installed ostensibly to protect valuable documents had actually been designed to create a soundproof execution chamber. The investigation revealed that Jonathan Pembroke's death had also been murder disguised as natural causes. The architect had been killed because he possessed detailed knowledge of the hidden compartments and their contents, knowledge that would have made him a dangerous witness. If Isabella's allegations had ever been investigated, his death had been carefully timed to precede Isabella's murder by 1 day, ensuring that she would have no opportunity to learn of his fate before walking into the trap that had been set for her. The arrests that followed Isabella's discovery sent shockwaves through American high society that reverberated far beyond Newport's exclusive circles. Charles Pemberton, William Blackstone, and 3 other prominent Newport residents were charged with conspiracy to commit murder, while 2 Pinkerton agents faced charges of actual murder and concealment of evidence. But the legal proceedings that many expected to expose the full scope of the conspiracy never materialized. Within weeks of the arrests, a series of mysterious developments began to undermine the prosecution's case. Key witnesses, including Mrs. Margaret Winthrop, began to recant their testimony or claim that they had been mistaken in their observations. Evidence disappeared from police custody under circumstances that suggested official corruption. Most significantly, the Pinkerton Detective Agency's files related to the case were destroyed in a suspicious fire that consumed the agency's Boston offices. The federal investigation, which had initially proceeded with great vigor, began to encounter bureaucratic obstacles that seemed designed to slow progress indefinitely. Jurisdictional disputes arose between local, state, and federal authorities. Key investigators were reassigned to other cases, Legal challenges to search warrants and arrest procedures consumed months of court time. By the summer of 1890, it became clear that forces far more powerful than the Newport Police Department were working to ensure that the full truth of Isabella Fairmont's murder would never be revealed. The wealthy families involved had resources that extended into every level of government and law enforcement, and they were prepared to use those resources to protect themselves. The final blow to the investigation came when Theodore Fairmont, Isabella's widowed husband, announced that he was withdrawing his cooperation from the murder inquiry. In a statement released through his lawyers, Theodore declared that he had suffered enough tragedy and wished to allow his wife to rest in peace, without further sensationalism. Behind this public statement lay a private agreement that investigators would later piece together through financial records. Theodore had been offered substantial compensation for his steel company's government contracts, along with guarantees of social rehabilitation and financial security. In exchange, he agreed to cease all cooperation with the murder investigation, and to publicly support the theory that Isabella had died by suicide after becoming despondent about her exile. The criminal cases against the Newport conspirators collapsed in the fall of 1890. Charles Pemberton was acquitted on grounds of insufficient evidence. William Blackstone's case was dismissed on procedural grounds. The Pinkerton agents disappeared entirely, presumably relocated with new identities and financial compensation for their discretion. Isabella Fairmont was officially buried in a family plot at Newport's Island Cemetery. On October 15, 1890, the funeral was a private affair attended by fewer than 20 people. No society columnist covered the service, and no newspaper ran obituaries detailing her life or achievements. But the story of Isabella Fairmont's murder did not end with her burial or the collapse of the criminal cases against her killers. In the years that followed, a different kind of justice began to manifest itself in ways that suggested the dead woman's accusations had been entirely accurate. The families who had orchestrated Isabella Fairmont's murder believed they had successfully buried their secrets along with her body. But the corruption and criminal activities that she had threatened to expose proved to be the seeds of their own destruction. Charles Pemberton, the man in whose basement Isabella had died, never recovered from the psychological trauma of the murder. Friends and family members reported that he became increasingly paranoid and reclusive, convinced that Isabella's ghost was haunting his mansion. He moved permanently to his New York residence, but found no peace there either. His business empire, built on the kind of fraudulent government contracts that Isabella had discovered, began to unravel when federal investigators, working independently of the Newport murder case, uncovered evidence of systematic bid rigging and price manipulation. By 1895, Pemberton Steel Company was facing bankruptcy proceedings and federal prosecution for fraud. The hidden documents that Isabella had threatened to expose were eventually discovered during asset seizure proceedings, confirming every allegation she had made. Pemberton himself died in 1897, found dead in his New York mansion under circumstances that suggested suicide, though the official cause of death was listed as heart failure. Senator William Blackstone's political career suffered a similarly dramatic collapse. In 1892, a corruption investigation that had nothing to do with Isabella's murder uncovered the bribery evidence that she had claimed was hidden behind his library fireplace. The documents discovered during a federal raid detailed a systematic scheme to sell Senate votes on railroad legislation. Blackstone was expelled from the Senate in disgrace and died in poverty in 1899, his family fortune consumed by legal fees and restitution payments. The pattern repeated itself with each of the families who had participated in Isabella's murder. Railroad magnate Thomas Hartwell was ruined when the Interstate Commerce Commission discovered the price-fixing conspiracy that Isabella had threatened to expose. His suicide in 1896 was front-page news in newspapers across the country. Banking heir Robert Sterling lost his fortune in the Panic of 1893, largely because his illegal lending practices, the same ones Isabella